a little later in this trial. After May 19th, the defendant went back to SPU on June 4th. This time he knew exactly where he was going. He went directly to Otto Miller Hall. He went at around 3 p.m. And the purpose of this visit was to find out if that was a good time to come back, if there were plenty of students and people to kill at that time of day. And then he went back the next day, June 5th, 2014, at around 3 p.m. And this time he brought his shotgun. He brought all 75 rounds of ammunition that he had bought in preparation for his attack. He got out of his truck that he parked, and he went around the building one last time. And then he sat in his truck, and he wrote these words. June 5th, 2014. This is it! Exclamation point. I can't believe I'm finally doing this! Exclamation point. So exciting, I'm jumpy. Since Virginia Tech and Columbine, I've been thinking about those a lot. I used to feel bad for the ones who were killed, but now Eric Harris and Sung Lee Cho became my idols, and they guided me till today. No matter how cute the girl is, no matter how cool the guy is, I just want people to die! Exclamation point. And I'm going to die with them. I'm not asking for forgiveness because there won't be any, but it is what it is. I'm doing some people a favor by sending them to heaven, and to those who are sinners like me, I'll see you in heaven. Eric Harris, for those of you who don't know, is one of the 2 people that shot and killed 13 at Columbine High School in 1999. And Sung Lee Cho is the man who shot and killed 32 people at Virginia Tech in 2002. After he wrote those words, the defendant deliberately and methodically assembled the double-barrel shotgun he brought. He loaded it. He crammed as many rounds as he could fit in his pockets. He got out of his truck, and he walked across the street to where a couple of students had been stopped to chat after class. And he told them to get inside or to freeze. Sophie Cuterillo Hackney and Thomas Fowler were 2 of those students, and they heard him say something like that, and they saw that he had a gun, but it didn't register. They didn't get it. They thought maybe it was a joke. You'll hear from Sophie and Thomas, and you will find that they, just like all the kids that go to classes in the building, are very bright, very logical and analytical thinkers. They're not very demonstrative or overly emotional. They're very linear thinkers, but this just didn't compute. Not at first. They thought it was a joke. So they just kind of kept talking. And Paul Lee, who was a 19-year-old freshman from Oregon who was walking down the street nearby, he just kept walking too. And this made the defendant really mad. As he later told the police, I was so pissed at him because he did not take me seriously. I hate it when people disrespect me. I was going to shoot people anyway, but I was really mad at him for doing that. And that's a theme from the defendant that you're going to hear throughout this case. Disrespect, humiliation, being really angry because people don't take him or his problem seriously. You'll hear that in his own words. That was what this is about. When the defendant thought about killing people before he carried out his attack, it made him feel powerful and respected in a way he didn't normally feel in his real life. That's why he wanted people to die. He wanted to take it seriously. And when Paul Lee didn't take him seriously enough or didn't show him enough respect, the defendant shot him point blank in the right side of his neck, causing a massive and catastrophic injury. Paul fell to the ground and was bleeding so badly that everyone who saw Sophie and Thomas and some other folks across the street, they knew immediately that Paul was going to die, and he did. the defendant, and the defendant did in fact tell the police later that he did get the respect he wanted after that first shot. And because the defendant had deliberately chosen that bird shot, in his words, to better disintegrate a human face, some of the pellets that either missed Paul or went through the injury on his face hit and struck Thomas Fowler, who was standing a few feet behind it. Thomas and Sophie stood there in shock for about 5 seconds. And during that time, the defendant aimed the gun at Sophie and pulled the trigger. It didn't fire either because it jammed or because the defendant forgot to flip the lever that switched the barrels. Either way, Sophie heard that click and she took off. She and Thomas ran as fast as they could around the back of Otto Miller Hall to a machine shop where they hid. Unable to hit those targets, the defendant calmly reloaded the top barrel of his gun and he went inside Otto Miller Hall. He walked in the hall, he walked in the doors which opened to the lobby, and he pointed his gun directly at Tristan Cooper Ralph, a student that was sitting at a table studying, he had his headphones in, he was looking at his left eye. And when Tristan looked up at the defendant said, "I just shot a man outside because he disrespected me." And Tristan did not say a word, he didn't laugh, he didn't ignore him. He kind of nodded his head and he took the defendant seriously. And it probably saved his life. Because at that moment, the defendant chose not to shoot Tristan. Sarah Williams, on the other hand, she was coming down the stairs that lead into the lobby, having just finished a math test early. And she either didn't hear the defendant or didn't see him when she was coming down the stairs or just kind of didn't register the peril she was in, and she kept walking. She thought it was a joke when she saw the man with a gun. Everybody thought this was like some end of the school year prank or something like that. And the defendant told the police that Sarah laughed at him. She didn't take him seriously. And again, he said that made him really mad. And so he chose to shoot Sarah. And he shot her right in the arm and the chest. In fact, her arm immediately was paralyzed. And she looked down and she had blood seeping out. And she was able to kind of walk away and sort of hide behind the stairs. Was thinking and how he felt in that moment. And you'll hear from Sarah about what happened to her and about what little she remembers about being taken to Harborview for the emergency surgery she was required to have in order to save her life that day. And you'll also hear later this week from other students and faculty who were in the building that day. And you're going to hear about their fear and their bravery. For instance, you're going to hear from John Means, who was a student that was working in a security or help desk in a little office right off the lobby of Otto Miller Hall. And you will hear about how he unquestionably saved countless lives when he saw the defendant attempting to reload his gun after he shot Sarah. And John ran out, pepper sprayed the defendant, tackled him, and took away his gun. And you'll hear from Justin Sarah, who ran down the stairs to help John, who disarmed the defendant with a knife that he had, shoveled all those shotgun shells out of his pocket, and helped John hold him down until campus security could arrive and the Seattle Police Department could take the defendant into custody. And let me be clear, the only reason that more people weren't killed that day, that the defendant's plan wasn't carried out to the full extent that he wanted it to, that he prepared for, was because of the heroic acts of John Meese and Justin Sarah. You're also going to hear from Hannah Judd and Chris Howard. These are students that were working around Batch Adder in or near the machine shop when Thomas and Sophie ran back there yelling, "There's a shooter, lock the doors." Hannah and Chris actually ran in the building, through the building, toward the front of the lobby, looking for other kids that they could warn to tell to hide to get in lockdown. And Hannah found Sarah back there by the stairs, bleeding terribly and absolutely terrified. And Hannah tried to move Sarah down the hall out of harm's way until Sarah collapsed. And then Hannah and Chris sat there with Sarah, putting pressure onto the wounds, keeping her talking so she wouldn't go into shock. And amazingly had the wherewithal to call Sarah's mom in Arizona, to put Amy Williams on the phone with her daughter so she could tell her she loved her and hear her voice, just in case Sarah didn't make it. And Hannah and Chris stayed with Sarah until help came. And Hannah actually had never met Sarah before that day. She followed the ambulance to the hospital and waited until Amy Williams could arrive from Arizona to be by her daughter's side. Hannah's actually graduated and moved to Australia, so she won't be here in person, but you'll hear her testimony in a video that she gave a couple months ago. And you'll see she's as stoic as all the rest of the kids from Otto Miller Hall, but you'll hear what she did that day. In addition to the folks in the building, you're also going to hear throughout the course of this trial from numerous Seattle Police Department officers and detectives who are going to hear about the initial response and SWAT and clearing the building, about the arrest of the defendant, the collection of evidence from the scene, from the defendant's car or truck, and from his house. You're going to hear in your own words the defendant's statement to the police hours after he killed Pauline. And you're going to hear his journal, what he wrote about his intentions and thoughts in the days and weeks before he carried out his attack. You're actually going to see a video of what happened inside that lobby in Otto Miller Hall that day. The defendant pointing a gun at Tristan, shooting Sarah, and John coming to overpower him. And I can tell you right now that most, if not all, of the evidence that I've just described to you will likely be in dispute. As you were just instructed by the judge, the defendant in this case has entered pleas of both not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity, as is his right. Because of those pleas, it's the state's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt each and every element of every crime charge. It's the state's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is the one that committed these crimes, that he did it with premeditation, that he was armed with a firearm when he did it, and that his actions had a destructive and foreseeable impact on persons other than the victim. And that is the state's burden, regardless of the fact that defense counsel talked about insanity and jury selection, and actually regardless of any concessions she might make during opening statements. It is the state's burden to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, and until it does, only at that point does the defendant have any burden, if he chooses, to prove he's not guilty by reason of insanity. Only after the state has met its burden does the defendant have to prove by preponderance, as you were just instructed by the judge, that as a result of a mental disease or defect, his mind was so affected, was affected to such an extent that he was unable to perceive the nature and quality of the acts for which he is charged, and that he was unable, or that he was unable to tell right from wrong with regard to those acts. I want to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, though, that just because it's the state's burden to prove the elements by preponderance, by beyond a reasonable doubt, and the defendant's burden to prove insanity by preponderance, that doesn't mean that the state's evidence and all the evidence that you will hear in the next few weeks is not relevant to his state of mind and whether he was insane. It is relevant, and we ask you to pay close attention to the state's evidence as you're thinking about any potential defense. For instance,
Honor, objection.
Proceed.
Here are some of the things the defendant said in his journal, which was found in the truck by the Seattle Police Department detectives, the crime scene investigators, about his intentions of state of mind before he committed these crimes. May 27, 2014, sometime by the end of this week or the beginning of next,
I will express how I really feel about humanity, America, and the world itself. 5:30 or May 30th, 2014. If I have time, I will try to get my revenge on some of the guys I hate. The shit talkers at the Getaway, a tavern he went to. The first one will be the fag in the cowboy hat, that cowardly, ungrateful son of a whore. You don't run your mouth at me and try to make me look bad. June 2nd, 2014. I used to always hate violence toward women, but there is no doubt that I'm going to kill quite a few in the shootout. I don't care anymore. Those are the defendant's words about what he was thinking and his state of mind before this crime occurred. Here are some of the things the defendant told the police hours after he killed Paul Reed, and how he explained his state of mind and intention at that time. I had to take it into my own hands to get the respect. I wasn't really targeting anyone specifically. I just had hatred toward the world. I just felt nothing but hate, 100% hatred toward the world, towards everyone. And then Columbine came into mind. I don't know how, but it just hit me. Eric Harris came into my head, the mastermind of the shooting. And I kept identifying with him ever since then, the past 3 years. Because he just made everything so exciting. He made hate so exciting. I wasn't really trying to get fame. I was just trying to express my hate and how I really felt about the world. He told the detectives he wanted to commit suicide, but it wasn't just that. He said it's not like when people say, kill yourself and not take innocent people. It was like one of those things where you're just like, when your hate gets you and you're like, I want to do this because this is how much I hate people. His own words back then make it quite clear that he knew what he was doing and that he knew what he was wrong. He told the cops. I knew the police would be coming. I knew now that I got caught, I'd have to go to prison. My family's going to be devastated by what I've done. My friends will think I'm scum. All things because you know it's wrong. Even when describing the thoughts and feelings he had that drove him to kill, the words he used reflect that he knew it was wrong legally and morally. Words like evil and hate and sin and I'll see you in hell. Those are his words. And they're important. What he said back then and what he did not say. You will hear evidence in this case that the defendant said before this happened that he felt controlled by his hate and evil feelings. You will not hear evidence that he said back then that he was commanded by God to commit these acts. Not before the experts got involved. His words matter. That being said, it's not going to be contested in this case that the defendant is mentally ill to some degree. You're going to hear evidence that he himself actually sought out help a few years before June 5th, 2014. Because he felt controlled by that hatred and had these violent tendencies and he had thoughts of suicide, he sought the help of a psychotherapist, Samantha Good. And you will hear that she diagnosed him with several significant mental disorders, as did a psychiatrist, Dr. Heidi Ulanski. And you'll hear that he was prescribed medications. And they'll testify about their attempts to treat him in their custody. You'll also hear evidence that several months before June 5th, the defendant stopped seeing Ms. Good and Dr. Ulanski. And then he stopped taking those prescribed medications. Again, that's undisputed. Why he stopped seeing his treatment providers or taking medications and whether that actually had any impact on him on June 5th, 2014 will likely be a little more disputed. You might hear evidence in this case that the defendant's insurance ran out and he could no longer afford treatment or medication. But these are some of his own words about therapy and medication. I gave therapy a shot, but the biggest reason I went was to get everyone off my back. Therapy, counseling, and help are the three words I hate the most because of that. I stopped taking my medications because I was stubborn. and I wanted to feel my hate. And plus, I didn't think it was worth it. I just love the hateful feeling. That's why he said he stopped. As made clear in voir dire, you are going to hear from experts in this case. Dr. Craig Beaver is retained by the defense, and Dr. Kenneth Muscatel is retained by the states. I'll tell you right now that both doctors will testify and tell you that the defendant does have a mental disease or defect. But mentally ill is not legally insane. And we